hope everybody's stretched their legs and had a chance to have a cuppa and, more importantly, digest what Keith was talking about. And it might take a bit longer than just a cuppa to digest what he was talking about, but I just want to say he did a great job, and I think he's really given us a lot of stuff to consider as researchers as well, and really thank him for being here tonight. So I won't go on like a WWF announcer. George Simpson is going to round out the night for us. George has been investigating UFOs for a very long time, over 30 years. He's the director of a UFON here in Victoria. He's probably knows more about the Valentius disappearance than many other people around. He's very passionate about it. And he's also contributes regularly to the Ufologist magazine, which is the Australian UFO magazine that's produced from Queensland by Robert Froehler. So I encourage you to read that if you can. It's local and homegrown. So without any further ado, I'll hand you over to George.
Thank you, Ben. Thanks everybody for coming. What a fantastic turnout to have so many people come along on a night like this. Fantastic. Ben just mentioned Robert Froehler. I'll just get a photo of him up there. There you go. That's Robert Froehler. And he's the partner of Diane Harrison. Diane Harrison is the lady who started this group called AUFORM. For many, many years in Australia, UFO groups have, UFO groups have, for many years in Australia, sort of combated against one another and disagreed with one another, and it's not productive. And Diane Harrison decided that it'd be really good to have an Australia-wide group where you could have an organisation that was had a head in every state, an Australia-wide group. Now, it was a great idea, and she started it many, many years ago. It must be a long time ago, because my son was in a pram when I came across that group of people. He's now, what, 19? Are you good? Oh, thank you. He's now 19 years old. He was in a pram, and I was out hunting for a Jimi Hendrix video, and I missed it, so I had to go over to Glen Waverley. And when I got there, because they had it in stock, I saw this magazine in a newsagent, and it sort of leapt off the shelf at me. It said Australian, the Ufologist, an Australian UFO magazine. I didn't even know there was one that existed. And now I write for it. Now the thing is, I was part of the committee at that stage of the Victorian UFO Research Society. Now, you could be on that committee for years and not know what really is going on. They were sharing magazines with UFO groups all around the world, and they would share their magazines. They would, excuse me, one for one, you know, you give me your magazine, I'll give you yours. So we're all subscribers to each other's magazines. And so they'd had a few copies of this Australian magazine, which was in the newsagents. And I've never seen anything in the newsagents before. A big colour magazine. Oh, it started off black and white, but colour covers and things, much better than the little thing that we used to put out. But it takes a lot of work to put out a magazine. And I guess VUFORs were sort of getting towards their sunset years, I guess, in time frame. And they were still doing everything the old way. And it came time for me to leave that group because I disagreed after many, many years of being with them. I started to disagree with the way that the way they treated their own members and their own people who came along to their groups. So I joined this one because there's no fighting going on. Now, we're all adults and we can have different views and different opinions about things and still be friends. We don't have to be at each other's throats over stuff. It tends to become a very emotive thing, you know, you're right and I'm wrong. We could all be wrong, you know, or we could all be right. We don't really have a handle on it. We've been studying this subject now for 50 years and we're still probably no closer to what the original MJ12 guys were in the 1940s when they sort of formulated the ETH, the extraterrestrial hypothesis. I still think that that's probably the most likely explanation for this phenomenon. And I joined the VUFORS group back in, hang on, I've got a frog in my throat, I can't get rid of it. I started in UFOs in the late 1980s, around the time of the Knowles case. That's when I got involved. Well, that's a long story, I won't go any further into that. Anyway, there's Robert Froehler. I took a photo of him when I was up there in Queensland in his office, where he produces the magazine. And he was standing in front of that poster there because at the time, Travis Walton had come out to give a talk at a conference just like this, but we had Travis Walton there. It was brilliant. I was the AV guy, changing the slides for Travis as he gave his talk. And you can actually get that talk that Travis gave, you can get it on DVD through Robert Froehler, through his magazine, through the Ufologist. Now, that's got nothing to do with what I wanted to talk to you about. None of it. That was all irrelevant. So just bear with me while I get my thoughts together. Okay, years ago I studied law. I never got a degree in law, but I studied a component of law at La Trobe University in the late 1980s. No, late 1970s was. Yeah, 1979 I was there. It's going back a long time. But what I discovered by studying law was, you know, you have an event that's happened, there's a date, there's a time, and something has happened and something gets reported, and you have an eyewitness, possibly, sometimes you'll have an eyewitness to an event. Eyewitnesses are very, very handy in court because they give you a view of what happened because they were actually there, and our legal system is pretty well based, in many cases, on eyewitness testimony. And being in UFO research, I find that when the witness is telling me something, if I can ascertain that they're actually genuine and telling the truth, it's a very, very powerful thing to have somebody telling you, look, this is what happened. And sometimes you can tell. Sometimes you can't tell if they're having a lend of you, like the people that Keith mentioned before who fabricated this abduction story. I remember when that happened, and I was pretty unsure about that one too, when it happened. And a lot of time was wasted by people trying to investigate that one, and it's a shame. But I reckon hoaxes are really in the minority, you know. Most people that come to want to report something don't want us to use their name. I had a police officer send me an email last month with these photos. He took these photos in the country. He didn't want me to show anyone the photos. They're still on my computer, but I'm not going to show them because he asked me not to. But they're just, I think it's just an insect flying past the camera. He didn't see anything unusual at the time. But anyway, let's get on to this picture here, this slide here. It's got the name Laurie. This gentleman's name, Laurie McGrath, and he made a report to the AUFON hotline. This is probably about 15 years ago. And he said, that's from an old fax. I used to have a fax machine, you know. You used to be able to have fax machines at home. And they were really good technology, and until the advertisers got onto it and started using up all your paper and your ink to give you their ads. So you get rid of the fax machine, don't you? But that was very handy for UFO research, because if you had somebody give you a report, you could say to them, look, can you do a sketch of what you saw and send it to me? And he did. Now, he had this sighting in Melbourne, in North Melbourne, somewhere around Coburg, in the early 1950s. And I said, can you sketch what you saw? And that's what he sketched. Now, just bear with me a second. I asked him, how big was that thing that you drew? And he said, you know those cargo aircraft? That's a Russian Antonov cargo plane. I just got that off the internet so I could show you how big they are. Those things are huge. You could put a train inside that and then fly away. They're so big, the capacity inside them. He said the thing that he drew in that sketch was 3 times bigger than one of those. There's another shot of it. Look at the number of engines on it. These things are massive. So this thing, I'll just go back to his picture. I'm not using PowerPoint. I don't like PowerPoint, so I just use files and folders and stuff. Now this, what he drew there, he said it had sort of hot flames coming out one end. And these were like windows with light coming out in front and a bit of a glow around it. What happened to him was he just said goodbye to his friend. And he was on his bike. He was about 20, 21 years old. It was in the 50s. Not many people had cars in those days, and he lived in Coburg. So he said, "See you later," and he got on his bike and he's riding along on his bike. And then he noticed there's a sort of a vibration happening to him as he's riding his bike, a sort of a heavy vibration. He thought, "Oh, I must have a flat tyre." So he stopped. He checked his front tyre, he checked his back tyre, they weren't flat. So he got back on the bike again, started riding. He feels this weird vibration thing again, and he's trying to work out where it's coming from and what could it be. And the next thing that went through his mind was, there must be a truck with its lights off that's about to run him over. So he's looking around, but there's nothing else on the road. And then he looked up and he saw this thing just hovering above the rooftops near him, and that's where the vibration was coming from. I said, "What was this vibration like?" He said, "Have you ever caught a bus?" "Yeah, sure, I've caught a bus." You know when you're waiting and the engine's idling, and it's a big diesel engine, and the sides of the bus are rattling, and you get that sort of vibration? That's the kind of vibration, the sort of frequency that he was feeling. But he shouldn't have been feeling that riding a bike, but it was coming from this thing. So he was pretty amazed. It was very, very big, bigger than an Antonov, bigger than 3, he said. So he's looking at this thing just above the houses, trying to work out what it was, and he said it slowly drifted off towards Albion Road, and he said if he'd blinked, he would have missed it. He said in a split second, it went straight up into the space. It appeared like a star in the sky. In a split second, had he blinked, he would have missed it. It made no sound as it left. There was no rush of wind. There was no sonic boom. So that's what he drew. A really, really good case. He decided to report it because he decided to write. He was about 72 years old when he told us about this, and he was writing his memoirs. And he realised when he was writing his memoirs, he had never actually made an official report about this sighting that he had. And it was over Melbourne. Now, he went back on the bike to his friend who he just said goodbye to, and his friend was just gobsmacked staring at the sky. And they went inside and told his friend's parents, and the friend's parents didn't believe him. But then his friend's older brother came home and said his friend's older brother was working for the RACV, driving around getting people started whose cars wouldn't start. There's a good chance that a car won't start with one of these things hovering over you. But the brother came home and said, "Guess what I saw tonight?" And it was in the papers. The father rang up the Air Force and the airports to try to find out if anybody had reported it. But the newspapers said about 50 people had rung in, and it was reported in the newspapers, apparently. Now, I haven't gone to the newspapers and checked it out, but in the archives, in the early 1950s, it would have been 51 or 52, something like that, and in the winter time. So there's a fair few newspapers to go through to find this UFO report. But that's one of the most interesting ones that I've ever had to investigate. And it's good to be able to share that with you. And it's bigger than 3 of these things. It's pretty massive. Just bear with me while I go through my little computer thingy. Oh yeah, this is a photo that you might have seen before. It's been in a lot of UFO books, and it was only taken a couple of kilometres from where we are here tonight. In Baldwin, the Baldwin photo. And that's the best possible quality that we can get of it. It was actually taken with a Polaroid camera in 1966, just a couple of days before the Westall case happened. Why this is interesting is because it's a very unusual thing. You often get witness testimony that they saw something. They don't often have a camera. They don't usually manage to photograph it at the time. And this is exhibiting some behaviour that's very, very little known and very little understood. UFO objects, the way they fly, really are astonishing for the people who see them because they behave in a way that is not expected. We always imagine if you throw a frisbee, that's the way UFOs fly around, and that's definitely not the way that they behave or the way that they fly. From the people who actually see them, give you a very different story to what you would imagine. And that thing had been on the ground, like a mushroom on the ground in the guy's backyard. And the first thing that he noticed, he didn't want his name associated with the photo either, but it did come out and it has been published in books and everything, so you can look it up. It's known as the Kibble photo, but I don't know if he's still alive. But that thing was on the ground, the round side up, the flat side was on the ground when he first saw it, and it was reflecting the sunlight. He wondered why his backyard was so lit up. I mean, it was a sunny day, but it looked like somebody was shining a spotlight on the backyard. But this shiny thing was in the backyard and lighting up the backyard because it was reflecting the sunlight. Anyway, it raised upwards, and so he went to get his camera, and he was doing renovations on his house, so he didn't have any curtains or windows, and that's why he saw it. And he came up to the balcony area and got his camera, a Polaroid camera, and went to take a photo, but it turned sideways. He thought, this is pretty odd, because it didn't seem to have anything supporting it or holding it up. It wasn't making any sound. And then it shot off. Now, what would you think, looking at that photo? Would it have gone to the left or to the right? What would you imagine? It went off in a split second. Boom. Looking at that photo, it went that way. The blunt end forwards and disappeared in a split second. If you have a look at Bob Lazar's work, you'll see that he talks about these gravity amplifiers that hang down underneath these machines, and that they can control the angle of them and they can control gravity. They would have been under the flat part of it, pointing to the left-hand side of that photograph, to the right-hand side of it, looking from where you are. So yeah, it went off in that direction. Completely astonishing. But he got a photo. It's very unusual to have a good photo. And this is like 2 days before the Westall case happened. And this is what was seen here, in only a few kilometres from Westall. We're only, 15, 20 kilometres from Clayton, something like that, maybe 30 at the most. Within 25k, I reckon. And just a couple of days before. And there was also the Burke's flood incident around the time this photo was taken, 1 or 2 days. An amazing picture. And it doesn't matter if you don't agree with it. When I first saw it, I thought, no, that's dumb. Why is it sideways? It's just how it is. That's how they are. Okay. This picture is in a very low resolution, but you can get an idea of the size of this ground mark in the grass by those little boys in the middle of the grass. The same week at Westall this happened, but it was up in Bankstown, New South Wales. This was in the newspapers in New South Wales. That gives you an idea of the circular area, the way the grass was squashed down in Victoria, at Westall. I saw the photograph that Judith McGee took when she went along. Something has actually pushed that grass down. It's pretty long grass. And the witnesses say that some of the students went over and were trying to lift the grass up, but it would stay down. It wouldn't come up. Something had pushed it down and it was staying down. That's a photograph taken earlier this year in the park called the Grange. They've made this UFO playground to commemorate this UFO event. The local council's done that. And that's Brenda Butler sitting in there. She couldn't get here tonight, but she runs a support group for people who've had the abduction experience. And that guy sitting with her is actually married to my cousin. And I had no idea that he was a witness to the UFO sighting event at Westall. I had no idea until they sent me the DVD. I helped them with the research of it when they started making this documentary called Westall 66, a suburban UFO mystery, which Shane Ryan had something to do with. And so they put me in the credits. My car's in it for a couple of seconds, but I'm not in that documentary. But he's interviewed. I was gobsmacked. They sent me this DVD and I'm watching it. There's my cousin's husband. I've known this guy for 30 years. He never talked about it. He's in my family, and never mentioned that he'd been at Westall and seen the thing personally. You just never know, do you? Now that's a picture of the Grange, where they later on put this playground with the flying saucer in. Now I took this photo just before that reunion. I think it was their 40th reunion of the Westall event, which would be about 2006 or 2007, something. 2006 it would have been. A friend of mine, who's the guy with his back to the camera in that photo, a guy called Gary, and the older gentleman there in the photo, his son came home from school and said, "Oh, we saw a flying saucer at school today, Dad." And he said, "No, you didn't, son. Those things don't exist." But then they saw it on the news that night, and so then he believed it. I think I've got... he's the old gentleman there. His name's Norm Bury. He actually organised the venue for the 40th anniversary of the big get-together. He had connections in the council and organised a really good room for them, much like this venue here. So you could have a lot of people together, and they had news crews. Had like 3 film crews turned up that day because there was so much interest in Westall. And Bill Chalker turned up. It was great to see Bill. I always have a good time whenever I see Bill. And Bill said something to me at that reunion. He said, "You know what, we've got a limited opportunity. We've got this room full of people, most of them witnesses. Get their names and numbers. Get all their names and numbers, all the details. Let's find out what we can." And I'd say about half of the people there only ever saw the circles in the ground, and less than half of them would have seen the object in the sky. But that photograph is showing Norm looking around. He's trying to get his bearings and trying to work out where he was, because the terrain has changed. The whole area is different now to what it was 40 years ago. Obviously, it's changed. When you go to the Grange, it's a really strange place. Has anybody here been there and looked around at the Grange? Very strange. The trees go in strange angles. It's a very strange place, but the UFO was seen to fly over the trees and then go down behind the trees in the Grange. He was never able to find a spot that he could say was definitely where the thing came down and left the mark on the ground. But we thought it was most likely somewhere over there. There's a lot of soil there that never used to be there. It's probably been buried by this sports field, which is just the other side of the fence. When we took Norm down there that day, he hadn't been there for 40 years. And he lives just around the corner. He hadn't been back for 40 years, but he went there on his bike to see if his son was telling the truth, and he found a big circle mark on the ground. So I believe him. He saw the circle anyway. Now, what else can I show you? This is just a photo I got off the internet years ago. I just typed in park and flying saucer, and this photo came up, and it looks a bit like what Westall might have looked like, or the Grange might have looked like 40 odd years ago. The trees wouldn't have been quite as big, and it kind of depicted what people said the craft looked like. So I just got that photo off the internet. I liked it, but it could be just a made-up photo. I don't know. Can't vouch for it. Yeah. Because she talked to the camera crew at Channel 9 came down and filmed and interviewed the kids on the day. They got through before the roads were blocked off. There was a big roadblock and everything was blocked off. So a lot of the press guys couldn't get in. They heard about it, but it was too late. They couldn't get in. But Joy got to the cameras and got interviewed and was going to be on TV. So it was really exciting to be on TV. And it was very exciting to see this strange object called Gail there, who actually jumped the fence and ran right into the Grange to where the circle, where they'd seen the thing come down, and it took off as she ran towards it, and as she said, it flew over her head. Joy didn't have that happen to her. Funny thing about this particular case with Westall is you've got like 200 students out playing sports at morning recess. It was a Wednesday morning. two days before Good Friday, so the school was closed on the Friday, and there's no newspapers printed on the Good Friday either. And anyway, so it's very hard to get any newspaper reports on it because they didn't print anything. There was one tiny little paragraph about the Westall case that said that these students thought they'd seen a flying saucer yesterday, but the Weather Bureau launched a weather balloon at Point Cook that morning, and it's probably what they saw because it might have gone towards Clayton. And that was, none of the students believed it, but that's what was put in the paper. That was the only reference, and it was in The Age. There's no reference in any other newspapers. Another thing that I found out was the Truth newspaper was very big in Melbourne in those days, and they had a lot of ladies in bikinis and stuff like that, you know, and racing news and stuff, and sporting news. Not a lot of factual news, but their reporters were really into the UFO subject. Some of them had been called out to photograph these lights in the sky over Mount Dandenong at night time, and they'd had feature articles on these photographs that their own reporters had taken. And they actually had, in the same week that Westall happened, they said, if you have a UFO sighting, contact us. We will publish it. Please let us know. We're really interested in this. There's a lot of sightings happening. And there's never a mention of Westall in the Truth newspaper. I've looked through all the archives of the Truth newspaper. I can't find any mention of Westall. That's interesting. When they were interviewing her on camera, somebody in uniform came up and said, right, this interview is over, stop filming, you go back into school, go into class, stop the interviewing, this interview is over. And that's how it went to air, that's how Channel 9 put it to air. And this is the footage that Shane Ryan's been trying to get during the making of the documentary on Westall, and you can't get it because it's not in the archives anymore, it's disappeared. There's other things I don't have on audio that I can tell you about. At the Grange there's two schools, there's a high school and a primary school in the same area. And the primary school principal missed the event because he had to go out somewhere, and he came back at lunchtime. And he told us on camera, and Bill Chalker filmed him talking, saying this. I was there when it was being filmed. Bill was filming it, and he's got the tape, but I didn't have time to get it for us tonight. But this high school principal was saying that he saw something that day that he had never seen in his entire professional career as a school teacher and as a principal of a school. He came back at lunchtime, and it was playtime, lunchtime, and the kids weren't playing in the primary school. He said they were huddled together in little groups, and they were wide-eyed with fear as a result of seeing this flying saucer going over. They thought that they were going to be taken away by the flying saucer and they'd never see their parents again. And they had to all be debriefed. They had to be told everything was okay, your parents will come and pick you up, and everything's going to be okay. These were little kids. Now that's a huge, I'm very interested in that, it's a huge psychological difference to the high school kids. Because the high school kids were in science class with Mr. Greenwood, and some kid came in and said, oh, there's a flying saucer outside. Everybody cleared the room. They ran out on the oval to get closer, to have a look at it. It's a bit of a different reaction to these little kids that are wide-eyed with fear, isn't it? It's the psychology is just really amazing. I forgot about this photograph. This is a photograph taken by either Judith McGee or Paul Norman from VUFOA. They were the people that ran down there at the time to investigate. They couldn't get any witnesses to talk because they'd been told to shut up, and they did. They were school kids. They did what they were told. One of the interesting things, another thing that didn't come out in the film, they did talk about this girl who never came back to school. She got very close to the object when it came down on the ground, and she never came back to school. She was taken away in an ambulance. And the producers were trying to find this lady and trying to find out what happened to her, and to this day she doesn't want to talk about it. But her parents went and put her in a convent somewhere. She had some kind of a major nervous breakdown as a result of this major overriding, totally overwhelming event that happened to her. And I was only told this last year by some of these witnesses that are still around that some of them were friends of this girl who never came back. And so they went around to her house about a week later and knocked on the door to say, to talk to the parents and find out, is she coming back to school? How is she? Is she okay? Different people answered the door and said she doesn't live here. She's never lived here. You know, this really sounds like something from the X-Files or something, doesn't it? This happened here in Melbourne in 1966. Absolutely true. This is what these people are telling me. These witnesses at Westall. They were students, they lived it. I asked the question, if it was actually a weather balloon, would you still be talking about it 40 years later? You know? You wonder. There was the teacher whose camera was confiscated because she took photographs of this thing. Why would you take the camera off the teacher, which is in fact illegal to take somebody's property like that? They didn't take the film, they took the camera. She never got a camera back as far as we know. Why would you do that if they just photographed a weather balloon? Weather balloons go over all the time. Who gives a crap? Seriously. I wanted to just quickly show you a sketch that a lady told us about her sighting, which is over in Montana, 2001. And she was an artist, and she faxed this to me. And a very interesting shape, because this was hovering over her back fence one night. She went out to have a cigarette and she saw this thing, but she didn't have a camera, but that's what she drew. It was making no noise and was hovering over her back fence. And this is a photo of the Roy Manifold picture, taken from a very big poster that was made, which is now faded, but if I blow it up so you can really see the object, there's the whole object there. That you're seeing the grain of the film there, because it was blown up so big, optically, that's actually the grain of the film. You can't get it clearer than that. That is the grain of the film from that object, but the colours have faded. And this is the thing that was photographed only minutes before Frederick Valentich flew past, and then reported that he was being buzzed by this object. And this is the sketch from Travis Walton's book about what he saw when he was dropped off and the thing flew away. And it's a very similar shape, but from underneath, with the windows all the way around. And see how Diane's object has these windows around, Diane McCool from Montana. So very interesting that the shapes look very, very similar. And then that leads us into the Frederick Valentich saga. I was hoping to get a photograph of the actual plane dashboard because my sister flew in that plane 2 years before it disappeared and took a photo of a friend of ours flying the plane, and we had a photo of the dashboard of that plane. That's not it, but that's what it looked like. But I can't get it. I've tried, I've really tried. We've lost the negative. She gave copies to various friends and they've all lost their copies too. It just happens. People do lose things. They move, they throw things away. There's a photograph of the plaque down at Cape Otway. I went down there a month or so ago and took a photo. This is a historical photo here of the NASA scientist, Dr. Richard Haynes, meeting Guido for the first time. They'd been in correspondence for over 20 years and they'd never met. And I took this photo of them. This was at View Falls at Judy McGee's house in 1998. And I just got a shot of them because I had the opportunity. And you saw the other picture before. Now, the next thing, there's only one more thing that I've got to tell you about. Where did it go? And it's kind of a new development that's come from Bill Chalker. And I've tried to do a mock-up photo of what this farmer apparently saw over in Adelaide the day after Frederick went missing. And this is just a model that I made to sort of give an idea of what it would look like to see if you had a big circular craft and an aircraft stuck to the side of it. And I've been ridiculed for presenting this case, and I'm just the news person, I'm just presenting the case. This farmer reported seeing that there was a plane stuck there, and he saw the registration number on it, and he scratched it into his tractor with a nail so he wouldn't forget the registration number. It is a bizarre story. Bill Chalker, when he first told me the story, what he said was, he rang me up and he said, have I ever told you about this possible bizarre connection between the Valentich disappearance and the New South Wales town of Coonabarabran? I said, no. What's the connection? And he said, well, this, he went up to Coonabarabran to investigate a whole lot of UFO sightings, and everyone he spoke to said, you've got to talk to Laurie, you must talk to this guy Laurie. Now, you're going to hear Laurie telling the story that this farmer told him. So, listen to this.
Well, the most interesting one of the lot is this farmer that came into the shop, and he pulled up outside on one of these little ag bikes, you know, like sewing machines, and I had a bit of a grin to myself. I've had about 15 or 16 motorbikes, and I've still got 4, you know. And I could kick myself for ever selling me Vincents, you know. Oh, yeah. But anyhow, it's done. And I thought, you know, riding one of those little sewing machines. Anyhow, he got off and stretched himself, and got his clothes off and that, and he came into the shop to get some little thing, I think a gas cylinder filled or something. Somehow I mentioned his bike and what did he do, you know, I always ask people this. And he was baling hay, and he said the bearing in the baler started to scream and make a noise, and he'd been having trouble with it, and he thought, oh no, not this again. So he stopped, put the baler out of gear, dismounted from the tractor and turned round, and the baler had stopped and the noise was still going. And he said, I was trying to come to grips with this for a minute, and he said, then I became aware of a shadow and looked up, and he said I was under a big saucer, he called it, and he said going from the length of the bale on the track it would have been 90 feet in diameter. And it was kind of, and as he's flown in aircraft and he gets his crops done, he knows when an aircraft's about to stall, and he thought, shit, this thing's going to drop on me. And he ran out beside the paddock, out from underneath it, looking up, and he said looking up under it, it kind of came in and went up just dark, you couldn't see anything. But the most remarkable part was, you know, on merry-go-rounds at shows, they have the horses, and they have, it's that wide, and they've got these little wooden lats. Have you noticed them? They're nailed to it so you don't slip over. Oh, yeah, yeah. They're about, inch and a half by half an inch, and then there's a gap, and there's another one. They're all around the edge. Well, he said that's what it looked like underneath, but there were 2 rows of them. If you blinked, you could see one row, which was rotating very fast, but the other one wasn't, and it was rotating in the opposite direction, but very slow. You could see it quite plainly. And he said as it moved slowly along, it kind of came up like that, but there was a piece sticking up out of the top like a dome, and round the bottom of the dome appeared to be a black seal of some kind. That's what he took it to be, like a weather sword or something. And he said the dome had it like a church door in it with an arched top, but no windows that he could see, and no handle on the door or anything. And he said on what he took to be the rear of it, there was slight protrusions that he would call rudders, and 2 big round holes. And he said there was shimmering heat coming out of one, and the other one, there were little spurts of flame coming out of it. And he gained the impression that one engine wasn't working, you know, because one disc wasn't spinning. And then, as he cleared it, he said the most remarkable thing of all, there was a Cessna aeroplane stuck to the side of it.
The whole aeroplane?
A whole aeroplane, yeah. He said the aeroplane, the tops of the wings were flat against the side of it, and the tail was kind of hanging down, a bit clear of the edge. And he said there were no chains or ropes or anything like that visible. And I think he said there was some oil running down the side of the Cessna, and he thought this may have been ingested if there was an air intake underneath or something, because heat and flame coming out would suggest air burning, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
Or something like that.
Combustion gas.
And anyhow, he scratched the registration number on the tractor with a nail, and he said, next time I come up, I'll give you the number. And he did. It's written down at the shop in a book. And the interesting thing is, it was the day following when that plane went missing between Victoria and Tasmania.
Right.
You know, when that one, he rang up and said there were lights around him and all kinds of things. Yeah.
So this would have put it back in around about October 78.
Yes, yeah. And it was the day following it. He said, anyhow, he said, this thing moved off, in the direction of where the military manoeuvres were. He said it kind of went over the ridge. He said the last he saw of it with this high-pitched sound. He said now, he was in town later in the day and he didn't mention it to anyone. And one of his neighbours said to him, "You're doing some more crop spreading?" He said, "No." He said, "What's the Cessna doing up in your top paddock?" He said, "There's no Cessna in my top paddock." He said, "Yes, there is, mate." He said, "I was up the top of my property," and he said, "I see it there, parked into your strip." Well, he said, "That's strange." He said, "I'll go and have a look when I go home." So he drove up and they'd opened 3 or 4 gates to get up onto this little plateau where they fly from. And he said there's no aeroplane there, but there were 3 tyre marks down through the grass. So he followed the tyre marks, and down the end was a big pool of foam sunboil on the ground. Now, the question is, had the plane been landed there and they dumped the oil out of it because it was causing problems, where did the plane go? Now, I got in touch with a commercial pilot, and all commercial pilots, I used to do a lot of flying myself, and I still hold a private licence, but all commercial pilots get a register of all planes. So I asked this commercial pilot to look this number up and see what he could find out about it, and it's now on an Oster down in Victoria somewhere. So my plan is to write to this fellow or ring him up and ask him who had the number prior to him, how did he come to get it, and see if he's evasive or whether he gives, he knows where it come from, because after an aircraft's lost and it's written off the register, they reissue that number to somebody else.
They do?
Yeah. So there's something funny going on there somewhere. But, you know, you could never invent a story like that. And he's gone to live up near Barraba somewhere. He's bought a place up there.
Right, so he's living
I've got
in
it all written down somewhere.
Right.
And as he told it to me, I wrote it down. And when I find it, I'll photocopy it and post you a copy of it.
Right.
With his current address, if I've got it.
So you reckon he's in the Barraba area now?
Yeah, Barraba, Bingra, over that way. He was looking at a small property there, somewhere on the river, and he was going to buy it and grow hay up there.
He said this farmer came into his shop one day, because he ran a hardware shop in Coonabarabran, and this farmer came in and said that they got talking about UFOs, and he said, well, he was baling hay one morning, and he heard this noise, so he uncoupled the thing, and the noise should have stopped, but it continued, and then he looked up and saw this big thing above him. He said it was about 90 feet in diameter, and going by the length of the tractor and the baler, it would be 90 feet in diameter, and he described that it had these sort of rims that rotated underneath it, one going in one direction, one going the other. One was going very slow, one was going very fast. It was making this screeching noise, so he thought, this one that's going very slow, there's something wrong with this thing, it's going to fall down. So he ran out sideways to get clear of it, because he thought it was going to drop on him. And then he could see there was a dome on top, and then he saw there was an aircraft stuck to the side of it. And the whole aircraft just plastered on the side of this thing. It would have looked like a cross on the side of this disc. And he could see the registration number on the wing, so he scratched it into his tractor with a nail so he wouldn't forget the number. Now, the guy who told us, who's talking on this tape, when he got that number from the guy telling the story, he checked an aircraft registry with a friend of his who was a commercial pilot, and found that that number now belongs to an aircraft somewhere down here in Victoria, an antique aircraft that's been restored and re-registered with the number DSJ. And that happened about 10 years after Fred disappeared. They re-registered that number on a new aircraft. It's an Oster. It's an old antique aircraft, an Oster. I've actually rung up the owner, or the guy who's now sold the aircraft, but I rang him up, the guy who restored it, and spoke to him about it, a guy called Gypsy Mick. He used to work in circuses all around country Australia, and he restored this aircraft. And but he confirmed that they re-registered the number DSJ for him, for this aircraft that was restored. That was the number. If you go to the aircraft, you go on your computer and just type in aircraft registry, type in VHDSJ, it'll tell you it's an Oster. So we know it was the same number that was scratched into the tractor. I'd like to find out who it was, but this guy telling the story didn't say who the farmer was. And that's what the news report in the paper a few weeks ago was all about. We're trying to find out who this farmer was, because he claimed that he saw this thing. Now, he might not be alive anymore. It was 36 years ago this year that happened. And so we don't know who he was. And so how can you do an investigation? You can't even get someone to find out anything about anyone if you don't have the name to go on. There is no name on this report. But it's a very, very clear and detailed description of what the guy saw. It also accounts for why nothing was ever found in the sea. They searched the sea, they never found the plane, they never found anything, not even an oil slick or anything. Because this farmer the next morning saw the thing flying away, still making this screaming noise, with the plane still stuck to the outside of it as it flew away. Where that went from there, we don't know. But it's an interesting story. It might just account for why the plane wasn't found in the sea, and that's about all. We don't know if Fred had survived the impact of that collision, or whether he did or didn't, we don't know. But that's all we've been trying to do. Anyway, I reckon we've probably been sitting down long enough now. We probably want time to have another cup of tea or something, I reckon. What do you reckon, Ben?
Sounds good, George. Thanks very much. Okay, well, we've actually officially reached our conclusion time. All right, guys, well, I think we might call it quits for tonight. I thank everybody for coming along. It's been a great evening, and I hope you've all enjoyed yourself. I hope you enjoyed coming out from home and making your way to the Kew Library and listening to our speakers. And I thank each and every one of our presenters because they did a great job. And thank you to all the team who helped organise the event as well.